We're closing out September with the release of Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, the newest Game Boy Advance title to hit the Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack. That's exciting news, but is this 2004 platformer actually worth playing? And what about the other Kirby games on the Nintendo Switch Online service that we haven't covered in this series? To answer that question, I decided to flip through the pages of Electronic Gaming Monthly, Nintendo Power, GamePro, and more classic magazines to see what the critics said back when these games first came out. So go and practice your breathing exercises, because we're going to be looking at a bunch of Kirby games in this episode of the Nintendo Switch Online Review Crew.
全く新しい世界の証明をしてみせよ。
見たこともない世界をあのカービィが大冒険。どう転がるかは君の頭と腕次第。スリリングボールアクションカービィボールスーパーファミコンで新登場。対戦プレイも盛り上がる。
それでもカービィは回っている。おお。
Before we dive into the main series, let's first take a look at one of Kirby's more intriguing spin-offs. Kirby's Dream Course was a weird and wonderfully wild miniature golf game that was released in 1995 on the Super Nintendo. It's the perfect vehicle for a character like Kirby, who proves to be more adept at putt-putt golf than pinball. It's also a cool way of showcasing Dreamland, as well as a bunch of familiar faces. All of these elements add up to a golf game that could only exist as a video game, which may be one of the reasons why it's still remembered so fondly all these decades later. But who cares about what we think today? We're here to find out what the critics said back in 1995. Now, the thing you're going to find is that the scores for Kirby's Dream Course were pretty consistent across the board, with most critics landing in the 80% range. That's exactly where Next Generation landed, which is even more impressive when you consider their largely negative thoughts on the last generation games. They explained that Kirby's Dream Course is too cute for its own good, but this game is still surprisingly unique and fascinating. Suddenly you're playing a game that's a lot more complex than the superficial Candyland exterior would lead you to believe. If you can keep from choking on the saccharin. This game is so unique, it rates it 4 stars just because it's unlike anything else we've ever seen. That's the same score that you saw with both video games and computer entertainment, and computer and video games, two magazines with very similar names. Hyper went a bit higher, giving it an 89%, but it's GamePro's 4.5 out of 5 that proved to be the highest score. They asked, wanna shoot 18 holes with a fat, morphing, multi-talented puff of fluff? No, not the president. Kirby's Dream Course does for golf what NBA Jam did for basketball. Believe it or not, it was actually Nintendo Power that gave Kirby's Dream Course the lowest score. Giving it a 3.7 out of 5, the nameless critic hated the annoying music and complained that making short shots could be tough. Though they did like the unique gameplay and the good 3/4 perspective. Look, this is one of those games that certainly gets by on its uniqueness, offering players something they've really never seen before. Well, the critics were right, and the music is a little bit annoying. I still think that the game holds up surprisingly well. Give it a putt on the Switch.
Seen a rash of these lately. TMK.
TMK.
Too much Kirby.
Think you can't get too much of a good thing? Try new Kirby Superstar. It's full-blown Kirby, inflated with 8 Kirby games, bloated with 23 Kirby enemies, bulging with new Kirby powers.
Get him into observation.
New Kirby Superstar, only on SNES. Can your system handle it?
Released 1 year after Dream Course, Kirby Superstar is yet another release that zigs when you're expecting it to zag. Instead of being another straightforward Kirby adventure like everybody expected, Superstar is actually a compilation of different Kirby games, each with their own themes and quirks. Sometimes you're uncovering treasure in a Metroidvania-inspired dream world, while other times you'll need to race while eating as much food as possible. This shows Kirby is more than just a platforming hero, but also a surprisingly versatile character that can be tossed into just about any genre. The problem was the release date, which came just 9 days before the launch of the Nintendo 64. Let's see if that timing had any impact on the scores. Although Kirby Superstar was reviewed in the same issue of Electronic Gaming Monthly as Super Mario 64 and Pilotwings 64, the critics still had plenty of high scores to pass around. Dan was baffled by the game, saying that I don't understand why I like this game. I'm almost ashamed to admit it. It's just that this card is a piñata packed full of extra goodies. Some of the side games are so simple in concept, but are, well, fun. You'll just have to experience it to understand what I mean. Once you play it with friends, you'll be hooked. Crispin also liked the game, arguing that Kirby Superstar proves that side-scrolling games can still be packed with fresh, imaginative gameplay. The novelty of this title lies in Kirby's ability to absorb the powers of any enemy he eats. Kirby can, therefore, shower bad guys with fireballs in 1 minute and then hack them with a sword in the next. The game is a bargain, too. It offers 6 side-scrolling games and 2 short bonus games. All will keep players occupied for a while. EGM gave Kirby Superstar an average score of 8.6 out of 10. Now, this is basically in line where Superplay was when they gave the game an 89%. They concluded that Superstar is pretty much everything you'd expect Kirby on the Super NES to be. Slick, colorful, and addictive, with a difficulty curve just on the wrong side of easy. Ignore his distinct lack of street cred and just enjoy another platform masterpiece, the likes of which you won't find on any other platform, 16 or 32-bit. Game Informer was not nearly as rosy on Kirby Superstar, giving the game a score of 7.25 out of 10. And then there's Computer and Video Games, who gave the title the lowest score I could find, a 3 out of 5. Paul Davies explains that Kirby remains one of my favorite characters because he is so versatile, plus his games always provide a lot of fun. They genuinely make me laugh. Superstar is typical of what you might expect from Nintendo's second-party development team, HAL. Oddball humor and ingenious game design. Assuming you still love your Super Nintendo, this is a game that's worth spending time with. But yes, it is easy. And that's the rub across the board. It doesn't really matter what Kirby game you're talking about, the games are always just a little bit too easy. Still, with so many different modes and minigames to play, Kirby Superstar is definitely a game you should get into. Finally, after years of waiting, Super Nintendo owners got a straightforward Kirby platformer. No anthology stories or allusion to miniature golf here, because this is Kirby's Dream Land 3, the series that started it all. There's just one problem. The Super NES game was released on November 27th, 1997. 14 months after the launch of the Nintendo 64 and more than 2 years after the 32-bit console war kicked off. There's a very real chance that you didn't even know that Kirby's Dream Land 3 was a thing, simply because it was released at a time when nobody was talking about 16-bit platformers. And when I say nobody, I'm mostly talking about game critics. When it comes to English language reviews published in a magazine released back when the game first came out, I could only find one. That's right, one. And it comes from Nintendo Power Issue 102, where they gave Kirby's Dream Land 3 a 6.5 out of 10. Scott had a very non-committal take, saying that Kirby has a dedicated following that should love this game, while Paul argued that Kirby 3 is very good for the targeted younger audience. It's straightforward but challenging in a trial and error sort of way. Dan also liked the game, commending the nice Yoshi Island hand-drawn graphics. So, while it's disappointing that only Nintendo Power reviewed Kirby's Dream Land 3, it's not all that surprising, really. Pretty much every magazine at the time had moved on, and with so many 32 and 64-bit games coming out, there simply wasn't room or even much of a push to review the 16-bit holdovers. The good news is that it's available on the Nintendo Switch Online, so if you missed it back in 1997, now is your chance to give it a play.
Alright, son, what's he look like?
Well, he was pink.
Caucasian?
No, pink.
And big, you saying?
Yeah, like a big marshmallow.
Yeah, what'd he do?
He made me and my friend play this game, Avalanche, and he'd dump all these little blobs on me. And the only way that I could survive was if I buried my buddy in boulders.
Oh, look, he's a cutie. Is this the guy?
Kirby's Avalanche, the chain reaction puzzle game. Or try Kirby's Dream Course. It's Psycho Golf in 3D, only for Super NES.
Alright, son. Marshmallow?
Coming almost a decade after his last mainline handheld game, Kirby hit the Game Boy Advance with a platformer that's all about broken mirrors. Taking inspiration from some of the modes in Superstar, Kirby the Amazing Mirror is a 2D Metroidvania game that sees our hero journey through the mirror dimension either solo or with a group of friends. While it doesn't really shake up the gameplay too much, the structure is definitely new, offering a bigger and more ambitious world than you've seen in any of the past titles. It looks great on the Game Boy Advance and really took the series back to its roots. But did the critics think this was a step backwards after the 64-bit entry? Let's find out. GMR was definitely not disappointed, even though they gave this handheld game a score of 7 out of 10. They argued that the Amazing Mirror has Kirby on the right track, and for the first time in years, starts to evolve the series. That said, they did have some issues with the structure. The problem is the game's core design. The developers went for a Metroid-style interlocking levels approach, but flubbed the execution. The levels don't intertwine well. Meanwhile, the goals are oddly divorced from the obvious targets, like boss fights. The game's other gimmick, calling in reinforcements from 3 multicolored Kirbys, doesn't add much. They'll flip a switch for you or attack enemies, but there's nothing essential or particularly helpful about it. Christian Nut concluded that the Amazing Mirror just doesn't quite live up to its ambitions. Game Informer, on the other hand, was a bit more charitable, giving the game a 7.75 out of 10. Nintendo Power went a bit higher, giving it an average score of 4 out of 5, with Jessica raving that the Amazing Mirror is by far the coolest Kirby game yet. The free-form multiplayer style adds a fresh spin to adventure platform games, and I hope to see more of it in the future. The game's puzzles, massive areas, and new copy abilities create a Kirby-filled experience that is as fun as it is challenging. Steven agreed, noting that while it's a bit easy, Kirby's first wholly original platforming romp on the Game Boy Advance goes whole hog in the overactive imagination department, just as Kirby fans like it. I'm gonna tell you, if there's one thing that I learned from Breaking Bad, it's that you always wanna go whole hog, no half measures. Alright, joking aside, the critics were a little mixed on Kirby and the Amazing Mirror. While it's a step in the right direction, not everybody was sold on the core gameplay. Check it out on the Switch and see for yourself.
¿Tienes problemas? Busca ayuda, llama a los poderes de tus nuevos amigos, descubre encrucijadas y gana nuevas habilidades en Kirby and the Amazing Mirror. Clasificado E para todos, solo para Game Boy Advance.
Hey, thanks for watching me break down these Kirby reviews. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new episodes just like this every single time Nintendo adds classic games to their online service. We have a whole playlist with dozens of episodes just like this one. Give it a binge. Now, here's the question I have for you. What's your favorite Kirby game? Look, it doesn't have to be one of these games, because our favorite sucker has been in all kinds of titles. Let me see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we're going to be back next week with a very special episode of Review Crew that you're going to love. I mean, I've been teasing it for a month now, and it's finally coming true. I can't wait to show you it next week. While you wait for that, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then,